Before there was an empire, before there were kings whose names would echo across centuries, there was a land shaped by extremes, high mountains and open plateaus, blistering deserts and hidden valleys, a place where the horizon feels distant and the sky feels close. This is the Iranian Plateau, the ancient heart of what we now call Persia. To stand here, even in imagination, is to feel the meeting of worlds, east and west, north and south, nomad and city, earth and sky. Persia did not emerge at the edge of history, it rose at its crossroads. Long before borders were drawn, long before dates were written, people moved through this land with the seasons, with their herds, with their stories, and with a deep attentiveness to the natural order around them. They watched the sun climb and fall. They measured time by stars. They learned the language of wind, fire, and stone. This attentiveness would become something more, something structured, something enduring. But not yet. First, there was orientation, a learning of place, a learning of balance. Ancient Persia begins not with conquest, but with relationship, between people and land, between human action and cosmic order. The mountains offered shelter and separation. The plains allowed movement and exchange. Trade routes passed through here not by accident, but because Persia sat between civilizations, absorbing ideas, refining them, and sending them onward. This was not isolation, this was connection, and with connection came responsibility. In this land, survival depended on cooperation, with the environment, with neighboring peoples, and with unseen forces believed to shape the world. Fire warmed and protected, but it could also destroy. The sun gave life, but it demanded respect. The night sky offered patterns, but only to those who observed patiently. From these observations, a worldview began to take shape. Not yet religion, not yet empire, but an understanding that the universe was ordered, and that human beings had a role within that order. Truth was not simply spoken, it was lived, maintained, protected. This idea, that reality itself had a moral structure, would become one of Persia's greatest contributions to human thought. But at this early threshold, it existed as instinct rather than doctrine. Stories were carried orally, passed beside fires, shared beneath open skies. They spoke of light and darkness, of harmony and disruption, of the consequences of choice. These were not distant myths. They were explanations for daily life. Why storms came, why seasons shifted, why communities thrived or fractured. In this world, the sky was not decoration, it was guidance. The stars were not distant ornaments, they were markers of time, signposts for movement, symbols of permanence in a changing world. To watch the heavens was not curiosity, it was necessity. And so, slowly, a people emerged who believed that paying attention mattered, that order could be strengthened, that chaos could be resisted, that human behavior had weight. This belief would one day shape kingship, law, governance, and faith. But here, at the threshold, we are still before all of that. We are standing in a moment when Persia is not yet a name of power, but a landscape of potential, a place listening to itself, learning its rhythms, finding its voice. In the hours ahead, we will follow how this worldview solidified, how it moved from observation to structure, from culture to civilization, from land to legacy. But for now, we begin simply, by entering the space, by recognizing the land, by understanding that Persia was never only a territory, it was a way of seeing the world. And once that way of seeing took hold, it would never fully disappear. To understand Persia before empire, we must slow the story even further. Before kings ruled, before laws were carved into stone, there existed a world held together by memory, movement, and mutual dependence. The early Iranian peoples did not see themselves as founders of a future empire. They saw themselves as participants in a living landscape. Life here demanded adaptation. Seasons shifted sharply. Water could be scarce. The land rewarded attentiveness and punished neglect. Communities formed around survival, but survival alone was never enough. Meaning was woven into daily life. Families moved with their animals, following cycles older than any written record. Paths were remembered, not mapped. Time was sensed, not counted. And yet, this world was not disordered. There was structure, but it was relational rather than imposed. Roles were defined by responsibility. Elders carried memory. Young people carried labor. Fire was tended carefully, not casually, because it represented continuity, the link between generations. Fire was not worshipped yet, but it was respected. It provided warmth, protection, and a gathering point. It was watched, maintained, never taken lightly. The sky above mirrored this attentiveness. Stars were not distant mysteries. They were clocks, guides, markers of repetition and return, when to move, when to plant, when to prepare for cold, when to expect change. Observation became a form of wisdom. From this wisdom emerged stories, not entertainment, but instruction. These early stories explained imbalance, why harmony could be broken, why wrongdoing carried consequences beyond the individual. The world, they believed, responded to human behavior. If harmony was maintained, life continued. If it was violated, disorder followed. This idea, that reality itself had an ethical dimension, was quietly forming, not as doctrine, not as law, but as lived experience. Over time, these understandings began to crystallize into shared values. Truth mattered, not merely as honesty between people, but as alignment with the way the world was meant to function. Falsehood was not simply a lie. It was a disruption, a fracture in the balance between human action and cosmic order. This distinction would later become central to Persian thought. But here, it existed as intuition rather than philosophy. Community survival depended on trust, on reliability, on honoring one's word. In this environment, leadership emerged naturally, not through force, but through demonstrated wisdom. Those who understood the land, the seasons, and the needs of the group were listened to. Authority was earned through service. Even conflict, when it arose, was framed in moral terms. Disputes were not only about resources, but about right action. about fairness, about restoring balance. This worldview shaped how early Persians saw themselves. They were not at the mercy of the universe, nor were they its masters. They were participants, bound by obligation to one another, to the land, and to forces greater than themselves. This sense of participation would later evolve into one of history's most influential ideas, that human beings have agency, and that their choices matter on a cosmic scale. But for now, that idea lived quietly in daily practice, in how fire was tended, in how agreements were honored, in how stories were told and remembered. There were no monuments yet, no capitals, no grand architecture. What existed instead was continuity, a culture capable of remembering itself. When trade routes expanded, these people did not merely exchange goods, they exchanged ideas. They listened, they adapted, they refined. Persia's future strength would come not from isolation, but from its ability to absorb without losing identity. This capacity, to integrate without dissolving, was forged long before empire. It was forged here, in the foundational world, where attention was survival and balance was sacred. Soon this worldview would encounter power, organization, law, and when it did, it would not vanish. It would scale. In the next movement, we will see how these early foundations gave rise to kingship, and how Persia transformed moral intuition into one of the most sophisticated systems of governance the ancient world had ever known. When Persia finally emerged as an empire, it did not do so suddenly. It rose the way a river gathers strength, from many streams, from long preparation, from patience rather than haste. The foundations were already in place, a belief in order, a respect for balance, an understanding that authority carried responsibility. What changed was scale. For the first time, these ideas were applied not to a tribe or a region, but to a world. At the center of this transformation stands a figure remembered not only for conquest, but for restraint. Cyrus of Persia. Cyrus did not rule through terror. He ruled through legitimacy. Where other kings crushed, Cyrus absorbed. Where others erased, he preserved. Cities that fell to Persian armies were not stripped of identity. Their customs were maintained. Their gods were respected. Their leaders often retained. This approach was not weakness. It was strategy rooted in worldview. Cyrus believed that order endured only when it was accepted, that power imposed without moral grounding dissolved into chaos. To rule the world, one first had to respect it. This philosophy reshaped kingship itself. The Persian king was not merely a conqueror, he was a guardian of balance, responsible not only for land, but for justice. Law became the language of this responsibility. Under Darius, this system matured. The empire was divided into regions, each governed according to local custom, but bound by a shared administrative framework. Taxes were standardized, roads were built, time and distance were measured. Communication flowed across thousands of miles. For the first time in history, a vast multicultural empire functioned as a single organism. This was not accidental. It was intentional design. Persia did not seek uniformity. It sought coherence. Different peoples, different languages, different traditions, all held together by law, infrastructure, and an idea of cosmic order mirrored in governance. The king stood at the center, not as a god, but as a steward. His legitimacy depended on his alignment with truth. If he ruled justly, the world remained in balance. If he ruled unjustly, that balance fractured. This belief placed limits on power. Persian kings were mighty, but they were not absolute. They were judged by history, by memory, and by the moral framework their own culture upheld. Architecture reflected this philosophy. Persepolis was not a fortress, it was a statement. Reliefs show representatives of many nations walking together, bearing gifts, not in chains, but in procession. This was how Persia wished to be seen, as a harmonizer of diversity. The empire's roads connected continents. Its messaging systems carried commands faster than any rival. Its administrative records tracked time, goods, and obligations with precision. But beneath this efficiency lay something deeper, a belief that governance was not separate from ethics, that law was not merely control, but alignment, that a well-ordered society reflected a well-ordered cosmos. This idea would echo far beyond Persia. Concepts of human rights, religious tolerance, rule of law. These did not begin fully formed in the modern world. They emerged here, in early expressions, within a civilization attempting something unprecedented. Persia proved that power did not have to mean cruelty, that size did not require brutality, that diversity could be sustained without erasure. Of course, the empire was not perfect. No system of this scale ever is. There were rebellions, failures, moments where ambition outpaced restraint. But the model endured. Even enemies learned from it. Even conquerors adopted its methods. When Persia fell, its ideas did not vanish. They were absorbed, translated, reused. Like the early Persian peoples before them, the empire itself became a contributor, passing forward a system of order that would shape civilizations for centuries. Yet beneath all of this, the roads, the laws, the kings, the original worldview remained, that the universe was not random, that human action mattered, that order required participation. In the next movement, we will turn inward, away from administration and empire, and toward fire, stars, and the moral architecture of the soul. Because Persia did not only organize the world, it sought to understand its meaning. To understand Persia fully, we must now turn inward, away from roads and administration, away from kings and courts, toward fire, toward stars, toward the unseen architecture of the moral world. For the Persians, the universe was not silent. It spoke, through light, through pattern, through consequence. At the center of this understanding stood fire. Fire was not a god. It was not worshipped as an object. It was revered as a presence. Fire illuminated. Fire purified. Fire revealed what darkness concealed. In Persian thought, fire represented truth, clear, uncompromising, and sustaining. To tend fire was to practice attention. To keep it burning required care, discipline, and respect. This act became symbolic of a greater responsibility, to tend the inner fire of right action. From this symbolism emerged one of history's most influential moral frameworks. The universe, Persians believed, was structured around an ongoing struggle, not between gods, but between forces: truth and falsehood, order and chaos, creation and decay. These forces were not distant. They moved through the human world, through thought, through speech, through action. Every choice mattered. Good was not accidental, it was chosen. Evil was not abstract, it was enacted. This belief gave human life extraordinary weight. To live ethically was to participate in the maintenance of the cosmos itself. The stars reinforced this understanding. Persian sky watchers observed cycles with care. They tracked repetition, return, deviation. The heavens demonstrated that order was possible, but not automatic. Stars followed paths, yet those paths could be read only by those who studied patiently. Knowledge did not arrive suddenly. It was earned through observation over time. This patient attention shaped Persian spirituality. There was no rush toward revelation, no single moment of awakening. Instead, there was alignment, a gradual attunement between inner life and outer order. This worldview found its clearest expression in what we now call Zoroastrian thought. At its heart was a simple but demanding idea that truth sustains the world and falsehood weakens it. Human beings were not spectators in this struggle. They were participants. Each person carried responsibility for the condition of reality itself. This was not a passive spirituality. It did not ask for withdrawal from the world. It demanded engagement. To speak truthfully, to act justly, to think clearly. These were not personal virtues alone. They were cosmic duties. Even the soul was understood in relational terms. After death, one's actions shaped one's path, not through punishment imposed from above, but through alignment or misalignment with truth. The moral life created its own consequences. This idea would later echo through many traditions, through concepts of judgment, conscience, and moral accountability. But in Persia, it emerged not as fear, but as responsibility. The universe was not watching to condemn, it was watching to respond. Fire burned steadily, stars traced their courses. The world reflected human choice back to itself. This was a spirituality rooted in clarity, not mystery for its own sake. A belief that meaning was not hidden, but revealed through attention. That wisdom was not granted, but cultivated. And that the inner world, thought, intention, conscience, was as real as any empire. In this way, Persia did something rare. It united governance and spirituality, law and ethics, sky and soul. The same principles that structured the empire were believed to structure the universe. Order was not imposed, it was maintained, and it could be lost. In the final movement of this journey, we will look at what endured, how Persia's ideas survived conquest, translation, and time itself. Because although empires fall, worldviews can persist, and Persia's vision of moral order would continue to shape the human story long after its fires burned low. Empires rise, empires fall. This is the rhythm of history. But not everything that matters disappears when power fades. Some things travel more quietly, carried in language, in poetry, in memory, in ways of seeing the world. Persia is one of these enduring presences. Though its political dominance ended, its cultural and moral influence did not. It passed forward, through conquest, through translation, through absorption into other civilizations. Greek thinkers encountered Persian ideas of order and governance. Jewish theology absorbed concepts of moral dualism and cosmic justice. Christian and Islamic traditions inherited visions of judgment, conscience, and ethical responsibility. Even when Persia was spoken of as an enemy, its ideas were studied, borrowed, and reused. This is how influence truly works, not through force, but through persistence. Within Persia itself, identity survived through art and verse. Poetry became a vessel for memory, a way to preserve wisdom without monuments. Figures like Hafez and Rumi did not write as relics of a fallen empire. They wrote as continuations of a living tradition. Their words carried echoes of ancient fire temples, of star-filled nights, of moral clarity shaped thousands of years earlier. Through poetry, Persia remembered itself. Through story, it adapted. Through culture, it endured. What makes Persia remarkable is not simply what it achieved, but how it understood its place in the world. It did not see humanity as separate from the cosmos, nor as powerless within it. It saw human beings as participants, capable of strengthening order or weakening it. This idea remains with us. Every time we speak of conscience, of responsibility, of truth as something more than opinion. Every time we assume that actions matter beyond the immediate moment. These assumptions did not appear from nowhere. They were shaped, refined, carried forward. Persia was one of their great stewards. Tonight's journey has not been about dates or battles. It has been about a way of thinking, one that linked sky to soul, law to ethics, and power to responsibility. A civilization that believed the universe was intelligible, that order could be understood, and that human choice played a role in maintaining it. This belief remains quietly radical, even now. As this chapter draws to a close, we leave Persia not as a relic of the past, but as a continuing presence. Its fires no longer burn openly, but their light persists in ideas, in values, in the ongoing human effort to live truthfully within a vast and ordered world. The journey does not end here. Persia is one voice in a much larger human conversation, one that stretches across continents, across centuries, and across the night sky itself. For now, we allow this chapter to settle. The echoes remain. To understand what Persia accomplished, we must resist the temptation to summarize it too quickly. Persia was not simply large. It was not merely successful. It was not powerful in the way later empires would be powerful. It was coherent. That coherence did not emerge from force alone. It emerged from a way of thinking about reality itself. When Cyrus expanded Persian rule, he was not attempting to erase the world and rebuild it in his image. He was attempting to stabilize it. This distinction matters. Cyrus understood something rare for his time, that conquest without legitimacy produces instability, and instability eventually destroys power from within. So his approach was not domination, but integration. Cities were taken, but not humiliated. Temples were entered, but not desecrated. Local customs were not flattened, but preserved. This was not benevolence for its own sake. It was governance grounded in realism. A world composed of many peoples could not be ruled as though it were one. Order, in the Persian sense, meant alignment, not uniformity. Each region had its own rhythms, its own traditions, its own internal logic. Persia's task was not to overwrite those logics, but to connect them. This is why Cyrus is remembered differently than other conquerors. He was not only feared, he was trusted. Trust is the most difficult resource for any empire to acquire. Once lost, it cannot be reclaimed by force. Cyrus made trust a cornerstone of rule. When peoples believed that Persian authority would not erase them, they were far less likely to resist it. This created a feedback loop. Less resistance meant less repression. Less repression meant greater stability. Greater stability meant longevity. But an empire cannot survive on philosophy alone. Structure had to follow. This is where Darius enters the story. If Cyrus provided the moral vision, Darius provided the architecture. Under Darius, Persia became something unprecedented, a civilization that could manage scale without collapsing into chaos. The empire was divided into administrative regions, each governed locally, yet bound to a central system of law and accountability. This was not micromanagement. It was modular governance. Each region functioned semi-independently, but within a shared framework. Taxes were standardized, weights and measures were regulated, records were kept meticulously. Time itself became something that could be tracked. Calendars mattered, schedules mattered, documentation mattered. This was not bureaucracy for its own sake. It was memory. An empire without records forgets itself. An empire that forgets itself fractures. Persia remembered. Its road systems were not simply pathways for armies. They were arteries for information. Messages traveled with remarkable speed. Orders could be issued, clarified, corrected. Feedback moved in both directions. This meant the center was never entirely blind to the edges. Blindness is fatal to large systems. Persia understood this early. The famous Royal Road was not just infrastructure. It was a cognitive network. Information moved faster than rebellion could organize. Problems could be addressed before they metastasized. This gave Persia an advantage that was not immediately visible, but profoundly powerful. The empire could respond. Responsiveness is a form of intelligence. Persian kings did not rule by whim. They ruled through systems. Even the king himself was constrained. This is often overlooked. Persian kings were mighty, but they were not arbitrary. They were expected to rule in accordance with truth. If they failed to do so, their legitimacy weakened. This belief placed an internal check on authority. Power existed, but it was accountable, not to subjects, but to the moral order itself. This idea would echo forward into later concepts of lawful governance. The Persian king was not the source of order. He was its steward. That distinction shaped everything. Architecture reflected it. Reliefs at Persepolis do not depict terror or domination. They depict procession. Delegations from across the empire are shown bringing offerings, not as captives, but as participants. This imagery was intentional. It projected a vision of empire as cooperation rather than coercion. Persia understood something subtle. How an empire sees itself eventually becomes how it behaves. Symbols matter. Narratives matter. Self-image matters. Persia presented itself as an organizer of diversity, not its enemy. This made it resilient. Even when rebellions occurred, and they did, the empire rarely responded with indiscriminate destruction. The goal was restoration of order, not punishment for its own sake. Contrast this with later empires that ruled through fear. Those systems expanded rapidly, but collapsed just as quickly. Persia expanded deliberately. It endured. Underlying all of this was a philosophical assumption that the universe itself was ordered. This was not metaphorical. Persians believed that reality had structure, and that human systems should mirror that structure. Governance was not separate from cosmology. Law was not separate from ethics. Administration was not separate from meaning. To rule well was to align human systems with cosmic principles. This is why Persian administration feels unusually modern. It was not improvisational. It was principled. Time, measurement, law, communication. These were not conveniences. They were expressions of order. Persia did not merely conquer space. It organized it. And in doing so, it offered humanity a new model of what large-scale civilization could be. Not a machine of domination, but a network of participation. Not perfect, not eternal, but coherent. In the movements that follow, we will step away from the machinery of empire and look at the deeper assumptions that made it possible. Because Persia did not begin with systems, it began with ideas. Ideas about truth, about responsibility, about the role of human beings within a meaningful universe. And it is there, beneath roads and laws and kings, that Persia's most enduring legacy resides. And so, through the ages, the flame of Persia burned, not only in the grandeur of its kings and the splendor of its cities, but in the hearts and minds of its people. It whispered through the verses of its poets, echoed in the wisdom of its philosophers, and danced in the artistry of its craftsmen. From the hum of the bazaars to the quiet of the temples, the spirit of Persia was a tapestry woven with threads of knowledge, curiosity, and a deep respect for the mysteries of the universe. It is here, in these quiet corners of memory, that the watchers find the eternal flame still glowing. And so, through the ages, the flame of Persia burned, not only in the grandeur of its kings and the splendor of its cities, but in the quiet continuity of daily life. In the simple act of tending a fire at dusk, in the careful passing of stories from one generation to the next, in the way time itself seemed to slow beneath wide desert skies. Long after empires faded and borders shifted, something older remained, a way of seeing the world that understood balance rather than conquest, order rather than domination, light not as something to be seized, but as something to be kept alive. To the people of ancient Persia, fire was not merely heat or illumination. It was presence, a living reminder that the universe itself was shaped by forces both visible and unseen. Fire revealed truth. Fire consumed falsehood. Fire marked the boundary between chaos and harmony. And so it was guarded carefully, never extinguished, never allowed to fall into neglect. The eternal flame was not worshipped as a god, but honored as a reflection of cosmic order, of moral clarity, of continuity across time. In this way, Persia became a civilization not only of stone and law, but of memory. As centuries passed, caravans crossed the land, carrying spices, silk, and stories. Travelers arrived from distant realms, each bringing their own gods, their own fears, their own interpretations of the sky. And yet, beneath all these layers, the old understanding remained quietly intact. That the universe is shaped by opposing forces, that choice matters, that consciousness itself plays a role in how the world unfolds. It is here, within this enduring worldview, that the watchers lingered. They did not announce themselves. They did not demand devotion. They observed. From high above the plateau, from the silence beyond the stars, they watched as humanity learned, slowly, imperfectly, to organize itself around meaning rather than instinct alone. They saw early astronomers chart the movements of the heavens, not as distant curiosities, but as living rhythms that mirrored life on Earth. The rising and setting of stars, the return of constellations, the long procession of time itself. They saw how these patterns shaped calendars, rituals, and expectations, how the sky became a memory palace for human thought. And they noticed something else, that when catastrophe struck, when drought came, or war, or long winters, the memory of order did not vanish. It retreated inward. It survived in story, in symbol, in flame. This resilience was not accidental. Persia stood at the crossroads of the ancient world, between east and west, between mountain and sea, between the known and the unknowable. Ideas flowed through it like water through stone, reshaping everything they touched. And yet, Persia absorbed these ideas without losing itself. Kings rose and fell, but the deeper philosophy endured. Empires were conquered, but the internal architecture of meaning remained intact. To the watchers, this was remarkable. Across millennia, they had seen civilizations ignite brightly and burn out just as quickly. Cultures that chased power without balance. Societies that mistook domination for permanence. But Persia was different. It carried memory forward. Even as languages shifted and symbols evolved, the essential understanding remained. That the universe is not hostile, but structured. Not random, but patterned. Not indifferent, but responsive. That light and darkness are not enemies, but participants in an eternal dialogue. And so the watchers continued to observe. Persia, like many lands, carried these memories forward, not as dates or measurements, but as warnings and wisdom, as reminders that stability is never permanent, and that preparation begins in awareness. This too drew the watchers' attention, for they had seen what happens when civilizations forget the fragility of their footing. when certainty replaces humility, when power blinds perception. But Persia remembered. It remembered through fire, through poetry, through reverence for unseen order. And so, even as centuries layered themselves like sediment, the underlying awareness remained intact. The watchers noticed how Persian thought held space for duality without collapse, light and darkness, creation and destruction, choice and consequence. This was not fear-based thinking, it was observational, an understanding that the universe is not a simple place, but it is an intelligible one, that forces act, that cycles repeat, that consciousness adapts. From their vantage point beyond time, the watchers saw humanity inch forward, sometimes stumbling, sometimes leaping, always learning through repetition. They saw technologies rise and fall, languages bloom and fade, symbols shift their meanings. Yet the questions persisted. What endures? What watches us in return? What role do we play in a cosmos that clearly notices itself? These questions drift upward, carried by thought itself. The watchers do not answer them. They witness. They observe how each generation frames the unknown in its own language, how ancient truths reappear wearing new forms, how memory disguises itself as myth, philosophy, religion, science. All are attempts to touch the same underlying structure. That structure remains quietly present. The flame does not demand belief. The watchers do not require attention. They are patient. They have seen civilizations sleep before. They have seen awakenings unfold over centuries. They have seen silence do more work than sound. The land remembers. The sky remembers. The flame remembers. And somewhere beyond the edge of thought, the watchers continue their vigil, unchanged, attentive, quietly luminous. Across Persia's long history, what stands out is not merely what was built, but what was preserved. Empires often measure themselves by monuments, by walls, palaces, and victories etched into stone. Persia measured itself by continuity, by the careful transmission of values, stories, and ways of understanding the world that could survive even when physical structures did not. This made Persian culture unusually resilient. When political power shifted, administrative systems adapted. When faiths evolved, ethical frameworks were translated rather than discarded. When languages changed, poetry carried meaning forward in new forms. The watchers observed this adaptability closely. They had seen other civilizations fracture completely under similar pressures, identity dissolving as soon as institutions collapsed. Persia, by contrast, behaved more like a river than a fortress. It changed shape when obstructed, but it did not cease to flow. This quality becomes especially significant when viewed against the backdrop of deep time. Human history is not a smooth, upward curve. It is punctuated by interruptions, climatic shifts, ecological stress, sudden population declines. Archaeological and genetic evidence increasingly points to moments when human numbers were drastically reduced, when survival itself became uncertain. These events did not leave neat records. They left fragments, eroded landscapes, flood-scoured plains, weathered stone, and stories, encoded in myth, ritual, and symbol. From the watcher's perspective, such events are not anomalies. They are part of a larger pattern. Planetary systems evolve, climates oscillate, orbits shift, catastrophes occur. Civilizations that endure are not those that deny this reality, but those that incorporate it into their worldview. Persia appears to have done exactly that. Rather than imagining permanence, Persian thought emphasized stewardship. Rather than assuming dominance over nature, it emphasized alignment with cosmic order. Rather than seeking to control fate, it focused on choice within constraint. This is a subtle distinction, but an important one. It suggests a civilization aware, perhaps unconsciously, that disruption is inevitable, and that resilience lies in preparation rather than resistance. The watchers saw this mindset reflected again and again. In the way Persian astronomy focused on cycles rather than endpoints. In the way Persian ethics emphasized balance over absolutism. In the way Persian storytelling framed chaos not as evil, but as a condition to be navigated. Even the eternal flame reflects this philosophy. Fire is not static. It must be tended. It consumes as it illuminates. It can destroy, but it can also preserve. To carry fire is to accept responsibility. The watchers understood this symbolism well. Across worlds and epochs, they had seen civilizations choose either to externalize responsibility to gods, to rulers, to fate, or to internalize it. Persia leaned toward the latter. Responsibility was personal. Choice mattered. Participation in order was ongoing. This made Persian culture unusually compatible with survival across discontinuity. When one considers the possibility of ancient global disruptions, floods, long winters, rapid climate shifts, the implications become clearer. Physical traces may vanish, but mental frameworks can persist, re-emerging when conditions allow. From this perspective, Persia may not represent a beginning, but a remembering. A reassembly of ideas that had surfaced before under different names, in different forms, in other places and times. The watchers have seen this pattern repeatedly. Civilizations rediscover principles they once knew, often believing them new. Ethical systems reappear with different vocabulary. Cosmologies converge from separate origins. This is not coincidence. It is convergence under constraint. Given similar conditions, consciousness tends to arrive at similar conclusions. Persia's contribution lies not in originality alone, but in clarity. In the way it articulated enduring ideas at a moment when they could be stabilized, transmitted, and carried forward. That legacy remains active. It surfaces in later philosophical traditions, in legal concepts that balance authority with accountability, in cultural memory that values wisdom over spectacle. And even now, in the modern era, these ideas continue to exert quiet influence, often unnoticed, often uncredited, but persistent nonetheless. The watchers continue to observe how humanity navigates the tension between acceleration and remembrance. Technology has changed the scale of civilization, but not its underlying vulnerabilities. Speed has increased, but fragility remains. Complexity has grown, but dependence on stable systems has deepened. As Persia's story fades from the foreground of history, it does not disappear. It settles. Like sediment carried by a long river, Its influence becomes part of the foundation upon which later civilizations stand, often unseen, often unacknowledged, but structurally essential. The Watchers recognize this pattern well. Civilizations rarely end in finality. They transform, they diffuse, they become background architecture for what follows. Their most important contributions are not always visible at the surface, but embedded in assumptions, values, and inherited ways of thinking. Persia's enduring legacy lies precisely here, in the quiet conviction that order is not imposed, but maintained, that power carries obligation, that memory is a form of survival, that light, once understood, must be tended. These ideas did not vanish with empires. They migrated into philosophy, governance, poetry, and law. They resurfaced in distant places, wearing different names, shaped by new contexts, but carrying familiar structure. From the Watcher's perspective, this is how civilizations truly endure. Not by preserving artifacts intact, but by preserving coherence under change. The long arc of human history is filled with moments of rupture, events that reset populations, redraw landscapes, and erase entire chapters of lived experience. Floods, droughts, cold intervals, volcanic winters. Periods when continuity itself appears threatened. And yet, again and again, something survives. A pattern, a memory, a way of orienting consciousness toward the world. Persia appears to have been one such carrier, holding fragments of ancient understanding long enough for them to stabilize and re-emerge in new forms. This does not require mythologizing. It does not require certainty. It requires only attention. The Watchers have observed that when humanity remembers, even imperfectly, it adapts more effectively. When it forgets entirely, it repeats its most costly mistakes. In this sense, the eternal flame is not a relic of the past, but a metaphor for awareness itself, awareness that must be renewed, awareness that cannot be inherited passively, awareness that exists only through participation. As the modern world accelerates, compressing time, expanding reach, and amplifying consequence, the lessons carried quietly through Persia's long memory become newly relevant. Balance over dominance, continuity over spectacle, responsibility over entitlement. These are not ancient ideas, they are perennial ones. From their distant vantage, the Watchers do not measure progress by technology or territory. They measure it by coherence, by whether a civilization can remain internally aligned as its external conditions change. Persia's story suggests that such alignment is possible, not permanently, not flawlessly, but persistently. And so, as this chapter closes, the Watchers continue their observation, not of ruins, not of empires, but of patterns unfolding once more. The flame still burns, the sky still turns, the experiment continues, and somewhere between memory and future possibility, humanity carries forward what it can, sometimes knowingly, sometimes by instinct alone. This has always been enough to begin again.